Good evening. I call to order this meeting of the Finance, Organization, and Personnel Committee of the Keene City Council. We are the committee that deals with the business functions of the city. This meeting is being recorded for later broadcast on Cheshire TV, Channel 8. Anyone wishing to view a copy of the agenda and supporting materials will find it on the city website. The public and other city councilors will be recognized to ask questions, make comments on the agenda item under discussion. After being recognized, all remarks are to be made through the chair. Anyone who wishes to address the committee must first go to one of the microphones, have a seat, identify yourself, name and address. Limit your remarks to 3 minutes or less. Please do not be repetitious. Once the motion has been made and seconded, only the committee and public may speak. Councilors will have an opportunity at the next council meeting. Written comments from the public will be accepted at the clerk's office until Tuesday, 1 p.m. There's one item on the agenda that differs a little from the normal operations, and that's the final one, item 9, regarding the capital improvements program. That item has already had a public hearing, and thus the public may not speak any further on it. It's just for the committee to make its recommendation. So, all that being said, our first item on the agenda, we have a memorandum from the Parks, Recreation, and Cemeteries Director. Good evening, Mr. Bohannon. Come on down.
Andy Bohannon, Parks and Recreation Director. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Before you tonight is the American Legion, Gordon Bizzle Post number 4. We used there's two fields located behind their property that were in agreement through LWCF funds with the city for an extended period of time. That agreement ended just a few years ago, and since then we've entered into a one-year agreement with them each year hence after, and that's for $5,000. That agreement is that payment is shared with the Greater Keene Men's Softball League and the Greater Keene Women's Softball League. Total is about 75 teams, ebb and flow. They're in the process of registering now, so I'm not sure if they have about 70 or 75 this year. But those, we split those fees with those leagues and pay the fee for them. So tonight I'm looking for approval for the city manager to extend that contract for another year.
Okay, questions from the committee? Public comments, questions? Hearing none, Councilor Clark, please.
I move that the Finance, Organization, and Personnel Committee recommend that the city manager be authorized to renew the agreement with the American Legion Post number 4 and the City of Keene for a 1-year control and use agreement of the softball fields located at 797 Court Street.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Anything from the public? Committee? All in favor? We're 5-0.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda. Actually, I think it might make sense to flip item 2 and 3. We have a communication from Tom Cook in support of the franchise agreement. So it would make sense to hear from him before we actually discuss the franchise agreement.
Tom Cook, 10 Highland Avenue, Keene, New Hampshire. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm here as president of the board of Cheshire TV. You folks are probably aware that the agreement between the city of Keene and the Time Warner, at present time, the cable franchise agreement, the potential came up to extend our existing agreement. And in entering into negotiations with that, we had, as Cheshire TV, had some interest in different options that might be available to us relative to service as well. And so ultimately, I think you have our support letter before you. Ultimately, we just wanted to let you and the rest of the City Council know that we not only supremely appreciated John and Rebecca's representation of us and including us in the decisions, but all things told, we felt that the agreement that has been at least presented thus far, and I think the city and Time Warner are both happy with it. I think we're in full support of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Cook? Committee?
Yep.
Terry.
Yeah, Mr. Cook, I was wondering, did Cheshire TV do any sort of survey asking the ratepayers whether or not they wanted to have a second PAG channel?
Asking our subscribers, you mean?
Yeah.
Not to my knowledge. I can certainly defer to Director of Operations Lee Perkins, but what we had throughout our history, the greatest feedback we get is that the people appreciate the opportunity to see not only community events, but in particular, these kinds of meetings that we're recording right now and the City Council meeting. We've had such an influx of participants who have created their own shows that we started reaching, a couple of years ago even, we started reaching, for want of a better term, a saturation point, where we were unable to offer rebroadcasts of the City Council meetings and all of the subcommittee meetings to the extent that our subscribers felt they had a significant opportunity to make sure they could catch up on them. And so that's, as we were looking at that and taking a look at the review of the contract that we had existing and knowing that it was coming up, we were aware that the option for a second channel, which is pretty standard whenever you create anything with for a community access program, the opportunity for a second channel was approaching, and so we thought now is the time to act on that. And so our intention is to, and whichever channels end up being which, one will be a strictly community access, the Cinemaniacs, Lucas Show, that kinds of things, and then the other will be exclusively government and educational. And so while I don't believe we have, it's difficult to poll our viewers because, there's not any real way, it's not like a Nielsen situation where we can actively tell, well, we know Time Warner has this opportunity. I don't know how complex it is. We can't really tell who's watching what. And so our actions are really kind of based on viewer feedback, people we talk to on the streets. I don't know, Councilor Clark, if that answers your question, but based on what we've heard from our viewers, the implementation of a second channel, I think, will fulfill a lot of their desires, particularly toward government and education viewing.
Then follow up. I'd like to say that I really do believe that the Cheshire Tea offers superior programming.
Thank you.
Much better than what Time Warner offers us.
Okay, thank you.
But I just wanted to ask whether or not the ratepayers are aware that they're going to be paying for this extra channel and they're going to be paying an extra percentage.
Correct.
For this. So I was just kind of wondering whether or not we're just coming forward with doing this because all of the technical people and all of the people at the city think it's a great idea, but I'm just wondering whether or not people who are actually watching the programming know that they're going to be charged extra for this, and if they've had any input into this process at all.
I see. I may have misunderstood your original question then. If people who are concerned about that, and they should be, understandably, because you're right that our viewers and a percentage of the revenue that is gained from the city, a good percentage of it, not all of it, but comes to Cheshire TV to help pay for those operations, and that's paid through fees to the subscribers. As we've entered into these negotiations and had these discussions, for the past, ever since our iteration, I think that information has been available. The contract, as it stands right now, it will take us up to essentially an equivalent of the average cable access cost throughout the nation. We've been significantly lower than most cable access fees throughout the nation, and so that will certainly be one of our attempts. We will need to come before you folks and the City Council to request any increases in cable access fees, and that will obviously be an opportunity for the public and the subscribers to voice their opinion. But we're not trying to hide that in any way. It'll be certainly very much public information. But in as much as we can't gauge their interest in our channels, the opposite, I think, of that is true, that it's difficult for us to get that word out. We will certainly be endeavoring to do that because we will be asking, as you say, for an additional few pennies, a quarter a month on a basic rate. I'm not sure exactly what those figures are, so don't quote me on that, please. But we will do our best to let them know this is what you're going to pay, because it will be extra, but hopefully also this is the extra benefits you're going to get. You're going to get a second channel. You're going to get a lot higher quality programming and hopefully more availability of programming as we free up bandwidth. Does that answer your question?
Well, I thank you for your answer, and I thank you for the quality of the programming that you do offer.
Thank you.
Yeah, Councilor.
You started hitting on what I was going to ask. Excuse me. The franchise fee, is that two-part? Is that on the basic bill, or is it on your whole bill? And about approximately how much would it cost for the basic person?
I haven't put,
One second.
yes, I'm sorry.
Those questions probably should be on the other item, which is going to
Okay.
be
Oh, okay,
the IMS director. I just wanted to get this letter in on the
Certainly.
record,
I understand.
straight-up comments there, and then, so hold your question. Anything regarding the letter as such? So, to accept as informational
Yep,
would
we
be...
would, the Finance Committee recommends that we accept this as informational.
That's motion made and seconded. Anything from the public, councilors present, or committee? All in favor? 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Okay, now back to more the main event on the item. Item number 2, so-called, brought to us by our IMS director, Assistant City Manager.
Thank you, Rebecca Landry, IMS Director, Assistant City Manager. As you may recall, back in August, we came before the Planning Licenses and Development Committee to talk about the conversion from analog to digital and the Time Warner services, not just Cheshire TV. At that time, it became, we talked also about the request that Cheshire TV has made or was interested in making for the second PEG channel. And at that time, the Planning Licenses and Development Committee instructed the city manager to continue discussions with Time Warner because an amendment would be necessary to the franchise agreement in order to make that happen. Right now, the franchise agreement allows for a single PEG access channel. A certain threshold of non-regenerated programming would be necessary to activate a second channel according to the current terms of the franchise agreement. Because that threshold hasn't been reached, it was the amendment is necessary to the agreement in order to proceed with that second channel. And so we were able to talk to Time Warner about that. In October, Time Warner did start the process of preparing a draft amendment to the franchise agreement. There are other conditions in there. We do have a copy of the draft agreement. It certainly isn't finalized. We're here before you tonight to request authorization for the city manager to negotiate and execute that amendment. And I'm happy to answer questions you might have about the process or about the amendment itself.
Councilor Roberts, you want to go forward with your question?
The two-part, but I'll change the second part, is how is the franchise fees based? Is it based on the basic bill or individual's total bill?
Well, it does not include broadband internet services or any internet services, for example. That's excluded from what can be charged the franchise fee. So it's only on the cable video services.
Okay. And the second part is on page 3 of the, under section 3.6.
Of the amendment?
Yes. And the capital cost of, the cost of capital equipment in the amount of $6,574 to activate the second channel will be itemized as an excess fee on the customer's bill, not to exceed. So that would come out to $1,300 a year. So that $1,300 a year would be spread out over all Time Warner's subscribers.
Correct. We didn't get into a specific formula here, but as discussed when this was brought to us, they said it would be pennies, probably less than 2 cents per bill. Now, I don't have a final number. I can't give you on the record what the actual number of cents will be, but it will be pennies for no more than 5 years.
Councilor Clark.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, as part of this agreement, though, I understand is to extend their current agreement for 5 years. Where'd that come from?
That was, Time Warner decided that in order to add the second channel before the threshold was reached, they thought it would be reasonable to request an extension of 5 years.
Why is that?
Well, I guess that's that they wanted to extend the agreement. It would have normally have expired in 2018, so they're basically getting another 5 years in exchange for giving up the second channel early.
And what is it that is required really of them to put a second channel on?
Well, there's some equipment required, and I think I would actually defer to Lee Perkins specifically in terms of what actual actions will need to be taken to add the second channel. But there is equipment and there is some programming on their end that needs to take place. and it uses some of their bandwidth as well.
Was there any discussion in our negotiation, I assume that we've done negotiations with them, to ask them, well, maybe can't you do this a second channel without asking for a 5-year extension to your current contract? Because, you know, the current contract, as we've talked about, you know, some time ago, may not be something that is in the best interest of the ratepayers to go forward with, even when it expires in its current form, rather than, you know, extend it for 5 years. So, has it been discussed with them? What?
I think you asked two questions, and I'll try to answer them both. The first one is, why did they want another 5 years? And I think that they wanted something in exchange for adding the second channel. And I think that, you know, I understand that. I think that makes sense that they would want something in exchange. If we said, please give us the second channel, and that's it, they could very easily say, no, we have an agreement in place, we don't have to do that. And so this is just part of the negotiating process. Now, are we giving up something by extending the opportunity to renegotiate the agreement another 5 years versus doing it in 2018? Well, that would, we talked about this, and there's what is the possibility that someone else would come in and want to have that franchise agreement instead of Time Warner? And what are we able to get from Time Warner that we're not getting now if we renegotiate in 2018 versus 2023? So those questions came up and those discussions took place, and we feel that this is a reasonable place to be. Go ahead.
Can I ask you? You recall, I was a member of the former Cable TV Commission before it was for 5 years, and the last year I was the vice chair. And do you recall, you were at one of the meetings where we talked to Time Warner about some of the things that were required in their current franchise agreement. One of them being that they had to report to us any complaints from ratepayers. And we asked them to give us a list of complaints. They reported back that they had no complaints. And I remember asking them why, and they said that because they weren't required to write them down. There are many other things that we've asked of Time Warner. You spoke briefly about last October when we went from digital, the agreement there, and they were unwilling to give elderly people a waiver of some sort, to provide with them the ability for them to have access to their, to their basic cable service. I'm just wondering, what is it that I read in the wording in this proposal here about the positive relationship that we have with Time Warner, and I'm kind of wondering, I can't think of any positive relationship that we have with Time Warner. They seem to be sticking exactly to their franchise agreement. They're not willing to give us anything. They're not willing to give the ratepayers anything unless it's required by law. And then even if it is required by law, and I can mention two instances where it has to be pushing and shoving before they'll even acquiesce to that. So I'm kind of wondering why we're so easy to just give them this extra 5 years when I don't believe that they agree with anything that we want to do, and I don't think they deserve it.
Just as a thought, Councilor Clark, could you maybe create a memo to the city manager, because what we're talking about is to empower negotiation. So if you have some issues, share it with him and let him negotiate these things. And, you're right.
Well, okay,
perhaps he'll be able to utilize it.
Then I guess, what we're talking about here is their ability to negotiate and, what's the second one?
Execute.
Execute. I would strike execute.
Well, perhaps when we get to the motion,
Yeah.
take it.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd just like to address a few points. Again, I think there were a number of questions asked, so I'm going to try to answer the ones that I took note of. First of all, you did ask 5 years. That sounds like a lot to ask, right? And that was one of our instant reactions as well. We asked if they would be interested in talking about a second channel. They say, sure, but we want to have a 5-year extension. And we had the same reaction. Well, that's a lot to ask because we had a cap in the existing franchise agreement for a 3.25% franchise fee, and we didn't want to leave that cap in place for an extra 5 years. It sort of closed the door on the ability to raise that franchise fee without another negotiation of another amendment. And they were willing to actually provide an opportunity to get that franchise fee up to 5% within 2 years, rather than waiting until even 2018 to do that. So that was one of the areas of the franchise agreement that they were willing to also sort of help us with in exchange for going for the 5-year extension. So they didn't just try to sort of bully their way into a 5-year extension. They were willing to talk about some of the other points of concern that we would have had extending for 5 years. They addressed those concerns. We did talk in the PLD committee process and in an informational memo that went out about that concern of the elderly installation fee that they were having to charge, and what Time Warner's response was that they couldn't just waive the fee across the board, but if someone had trouble installing, they would consider doing it for no charge. So I do think they addressed that. As far as complaints go, whether it's the fee for the elderly or anyone else who had trouble paying it, or the complaints log, in all of those cases we found that they were doing everything required of them, whether it be of the franchise agreement or the federal law. And as far as negotiate and execute, we did, if that's the wish of the committee, then we'll go back. But we would need specific points as to what you would like us to talk to Time Warner about that hasn't already been worked through in the process after we went to PLD back in August.
Okay, so again, I would suggest that if Council Clark or anyone has any specific suggestions for the manager and the director to negotiate, that would be good. Regarding the waiving the charge for the elderly, I could tell you for a fact it didn't happen. But beyond that, question for you. Should Time Warner be purchased by Comcast or some other, what are the implications?
We had that conversation with Cheshire TV, and I know that there are representatives from Cheshire TV here tonight because we wanted to, they expressed originally some interest in talking about it. What if Comcast does take place of Time Warner? What could they potentially bring to the table that Time Warner isn't bringing to the table already?
Or the opposite.
Correct, right. And so it was my understanding that there wasn't really anything significant that they could potentially bring to the table. There was some discussion about whether or not they might be a little bit nicer about providing some free capital equipment or an opportunity to fund some capital equipment for Cheshire TV's operations, but there's no guarantee. And, of course, if they do take over Time Warner, then we still have the opportunity to negotiate with that organization.
Or do we?
Well,
no, that's
just like we are now, right?
Maybe that's a city attorney question, because if we sign this agreement likely carries forward for the next,
Correct.
I don't know how many years. City attorney, any thoughts?
Well, I'm certainly not privy to the negotiations that are going on between Comcast and Time Warner, but as a general understanding with respect to these kinds of transactions, it would certainly be in Comcast's interest to pick up all of the franchise agreements that exist that Time Warner has. Those are the assets that Comcast would be wanting to purchase. So absent anything else, I would assume that the franchise agreement that we negotiate and enter into and the extension would be assigned to Comcast as a result of the purchase, and they would follow the same terms and conditions at that point.
It would not open the door to further negotiations.
There's nothing in the agreement that allows them
us.
or us, frankly, that's correct, to reopen the agreement at that point. That certainly doesn't mean that either party can't approach the other party at any time during the process before the agreement expires and request a reopening and a reconsideration.
Any committee questions for the director?
Yes, if I may, you mentioned some of the other things that might have been asked of them, and, over the last 10 years, the number of minutes per hour of non-commercial programming has decreased. Now, but they keep charging us extra every year. Now, might not we negotiate with them, if they're going to every hour, instead of giving us 28 minutes, now they're giving us 24 minutes every hour, that kind of thing. There are a lot of things that can be negotiated. The things that they have changed, not that they have changed, but have changed because of the Federal Communications Act. Those things in the federal things that they sort of use to say, well, we have no control over.
Yes.
Although I understand the concerns, I cannot say whether or not any other provider would do any better or worse in the same category, whether it's Comcast or whoever the other cable TV providers are out there in other parts of the country. I know that it is in Time Warner's best interest to be as competitive as possible, whether they are competing with other land-based services or satellite-based services, or now the broadband internet-based services. So I can't say what we might negotiate with them if we were opening up the franchise in 2018 versus 2023, whether or not they'd be willing to change those kind of numbers. But I am confident that they will, whether or not we open up the negotiations, do whatever it takes to be competitive.
I guess my question was, has any of those been broached with them?
No, that has not been a part of this negotiation process, the
Why?
complaints or
Why?
the programming. It was just not part of getting the second channel for Cheshire TV. It did not come up in any of the discussions.
I don't see how network programming has anything to do with the cable station.
Well,
What they do for their commercial breaks and
when we're negotiating, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, but if we're renegotiating, and it says to negotiate and execute a new contract, wouldn't that open up all of the things that are at benefit to we're advocates of our ratepayer.
Sure.
Wouldn't that open up all of the things that our ratepayer would want to have whenever we open up negotiations, in business? If we're going to renegotiate a business contract, you're going to bring up all of the things that you think that are going to benefit you or your people or whatever. And if we haven't brought up those things in the negotiations, then it really isn't a negotiation. What we're doing is just giving them everything they want to have and nothing that we want to have. And I just don't think that that's the way to go about this, and I'm going to oppose giving them a 5-year extension on their contract.
May I respond? Oh.
say again?
May I respond?
Yes.
Just note that I just want to make it clear that certainly we could address other points. This was not an opening up of the franchise agreement. It was an amendment to address a specific request of Cheshire TV. So Time Warner stands in the position of being able to say, I guess we don't want to do this, and we'll wait until 2018 and Cheshire TV doesn't get the second channel. So that's the risk. we take in opening it up to that extent.
Anything further for the director? Mr. Perkins, did you want to add anything, or?
I'm happy to answer questions, but I don't have anything to add.
Okay.
I got a question. I have a question of Mr. Perkins.
Come on. Name and address, please.
Lee Perkins, 62 Colonial Drive.
Thank you.
When we're talking about the second channel basically being a government and educational channel, right now between, for example, the school board and the city council, about how many hours per month is that?
Per month?
Per month.
Excuse me. Would it be all right if I did it by week and then you can just multiply
Yes.
that by 4? I would say on average there's probably at least 20 hours a week of government and educational programming. It isn't always of the full 20, but because the meetings are on kind of an odd every other week schedule, school board meetings are monthly. In order to maintain some weekly normalcy, we have to leave those times blocked open. So even though the council is only on every other week, every Thursday night is open, and we're full. There's no room left in the schedule, and we get a lot of feedback. Someone asked earlier if we had surveyed people. For years, people have been saying, I wish that believe it or not, they would like to see those replayed more often, and because they can be so long, for anybody who doesn't know, our government programming block is Saturdays from noon to 8, and it's usually a full 8-hour block between all the different meetings. And to squeeze an 8-hour replay in 3 or 4 times a week just wipes out huge chunks of the other programming time. So the second channel would also give us the opportunity to bring back a bulletin board. So while it wouldn't be, all government meetings all the time, it would be replays of those meetings, and then between them would be a scrolling bulletin board like there used to be, which I think that a lot of people would appreciate. And over the year, I just got a phone call yesterday from somebody that wanted to put a notice on our bulletin board, which has been gone for 8 years, so I don't think they're a regular viewer, but the decision to ask for a second channel started almost 3 years ago, and we really wanted to be sure that we did this properly, that we didn't do it in such a way that we would regret it later. And the cost of $6,000 for hardware is really negligible when you spread that out over all the years, and it'll be 1 or 2 pennies per person. So we think it's the best possible arrangement given the circumstances. And for what it's worth, even though it's not really part of the question, you're talking about Time Warner Cable, one of the largest corporations in the world, and as much as I would like them to do what I want them to do, they're going to do what they're going to do. So I would love to have a renegotiation in 2018 and get $100,000 a year for equipment and 2 HD channels and a production van, and but it's not going to happen. So we will just chip away a little bit at a time over 10 years until we get everything we want.
A follow-up question. This is probably going to be rhetorical. So if my math is correct, 20 times 4 is 80, and if you show each show twice, that's 160, and there's only 168 hours in a week. You don't have much time for your bulletin board, so.
Right. Well, again, I have to leave blocks open, even though, sometimes you guys have meetings that last 30 minutes, but I have to block them at 2 hours. And when they go over 2 hours, we have to figure out how to shuffle everything to make everything fit. And it's not pleasant when someone comes into the studio every week and makes an hour-long show and then gets preempted by the last 30 minutes of a meeting, and, those regular viewers don't get to see it. They feel like they've wasted their time coming in to produce it. And so we think that this meets everyone's needs as closely as possible and costs the least amount of money.
Real quick thought. So basically, once you get the second channel is basically going to be quite full. Standalone by a full.
It'll be full of lots and lots of replays of meetings and bulletin board stuff.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions for Mr. Perkins? Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, so now it's committee time for a motion and some action on such.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Yes, please. From the public.
Here?
Yep, please have a seat.
Joe Merzoff, Summit Road.
I'll pick it up.
What?
The volume picks up when you start talking.
I like your drift. I've only been here since April, and when I signed up for Time Warner, I thought I was going to be paying like $90 for everything phone, and now I'm paying twice as much, and I have complained, so if you haven't gotten complaints, I've complained, so there has been complaints.
They don't have to write it down.
What?
They don't have to write it down.
I know. I understand. And I think I don't know what you are permitting them to. Is it your wires in town? Or has there been town-wide discussion about this contract?
This contract? Well,
You should gather up people and ask them what they think of the service. I mean, I don't know what control you have over this. I mean, if you do own the wires in the town and you can call
they
them-
own the wires.
They own the wires? Well, what can say, do we have alternatives? Can Verizon come in?
The city attorney, can you explain what a franchise agreement is about? How did we get here?
Sure, I mean, and the
how far can
IMS
we go?
director, I'm sure, would be able to speak to this as well. She alluded to it, I think, in her comments, and the reality is, as far as I can tell, and as far as Rebecca would probably speak to on the ground, technically, is the franchise open to others? The answer to that question is yes. Practically, is that possible? The answer to that question is generally no. The infrastructure costs are quite high to do that. Generally, the industry sort of carves out the areas that they operate in and the areas that they don't. One of the things that Comcast is suggesting to the FCC in order to allow this acquisition to go forward is pointing out that they really operate in different market areas to a large extent. So while it would be nice to be able to say, yeah, we could open it up to competition, I think in the industry, as a practical matter, you will not see that happen. And I'm happy to let the IMS director speak to that if she wishes.
This,
Is this some?
Yep, just
Add to
Rebecca Land, the IMS director. It is a non-exclusive franchise agreement. Anybody who wants to provide video cable services in Keene may approach the city for a franchise. Time Warner does not have a hold on that.
so what are they getting? What are you giving away till 2023?
Am I correct that they own the wires, though?
They own all of the infrastructure, that is correct.
But first of all, in technology, a tremendous amount can change between now and 2018. I don't know how you're constraining the town. What do you give? Why do they want this? What are you giving away that they're claiming? What do they own by you signing this contract? I mean, how does it affect me? How does it affect the customer?
I would encourage Tom, the city attorney, to also provide some input, but what it gives you is an advocate. So if you have a complaint and you're not satisfied with the result, you can call the city, or any subscriber can call the city, and we can handle it through our, in this case it would be the PLD committee if it's not resolved satisfactorily. So that's one thing that the community gets out of having this franchise. So we really are an advocate for the community in terms of the services that they are being provided.
But what are we giving? What are we signing away? Why do they want 5 more years? What are we signing away there?
City manager, perhaps.
What alternatives are we restricted to because we signed this contract?
Okay, see if the city manager can shed some light on.
I walked in late, so I'll apologize for that. So you may have already provided a portion of this answer or the answer in its entirety already. So if that's the case, please stop me. But the initial request came from the city as a result of our ongoing conversations with Cheshire TV, asking Time Warner to make several concessions. That opened up the conversation. It went back and forth relative to a variety of issues that both Time Warner, Cheshire TV, and the city of Keene were interested in. As a result of that, this arrangement relative to an extension of the existing franchise agreement came about, and now we're here this evening talking about it. A franchise agreement is non-exclusive. It's more than just an advocacy. I think that would occur if it were in the community regardless. It is an agreement between the city and any interested entity that wants to provide cable service. Unfortunately, we're a tiny market. As a result of that, there are no competition. There will be no competition relative to infrastructure the like of what Time Warner has available to it. They couldn't afford to come in and compete. Now, if we were in metropolitan Los Angeles, there probably would be 2 or 3 providers, but not in Keene, New Hampshire, not in most small communities. So the franchise agreement is a foundation. It's a basis for an arrangement, for an agreement. It does provide for technology. In the past, it's worked quite well relative to that technology. It's only in their best interest to provide additional technology and to make improvements as they go, because they lose their customer base without it. I'm not aware of any particular disservice that's been done to the customer. Of course, people don't want to pay any more for these channels. However, Time Warner, when it negotiates these channels, as we know, CBS being a prime example, has to pay more for these channels. As a result of that, they pass along some of that cost. And there is DirecTV. There are alternatives if you feel that the service is not worth the price that you're paying for it.
Does that somewhat answer your question?
Sort of. I still don't understand.
And also, I apologize for not going to the public to ask for questions.
Right.
My mistake. Thank you. Yeah.
Before Mrs. Landry leaves. We've been talking about 2023, and you also brought up about new technology. And one of the things around the country, Google is doing broadband, and they're doing their own, basically, non-cable service through broadband. So it would be quite possible 5-6 years from now that cable TV, such as Time Warner or Comcast is delivering, would become obsolete, and some big one like Google or someone else could come and take their place as a viable, cheaper alternative.
Yeah, what we're seeing is, like you said, eventually people moving away from cable TV services and investing more in broadband fiber optic infrastructure. The fiber optic infrastructure can deliver voice, data, video, you name it. And so that's where we see more of the, what are some of the video providers over the web? Hulu, right? Netflix, and you'll see more and more of these internet-based providers as the broadband deployments grow. Google Fiber, don't get me started. We did apply to be a Google Fiber community. We lost to, was it Kansas City, or I think maybe it was Topeka, Kansas. But anyway, Google right now has chosen other communities to deploy their fiber optic networks in every region except New England. However, we are talking, and very much talking with people like Monadnock Economic Development Commission and Fast Roads about how we can support this concept called Gigabit Keene. So that we can, whether or not Google comes to town, we can have fiber to the doorstep one way or another, so that we continue to sort of enable this competitive landscape.
Thank you.
Thank you. More committee questions? Councilor Clark.
I would like to speak to the advocacy. As Vice Chairman of the former Cable TV Commission, I asked for a list of complaints, and I was told that they didn't have any complaints. And I asked them why, and they told me that they didn't have to write them down. So much for the advocacy of the city. I was asking in response to a number of people who were complaining about service. We are powerless when it comes to Time Warner Cable. Clear and simple. We are powerless, and every time that we ask them of something, they refuse, and they point to the franchise agreement saying, by law, we're only required to do this. Okay, fine. By law, we're only required to do this. We have what I think is a franchise agreement that is a bad deal for ratepayers, and it has been for a number of years. In 1987, I was the host of a mayoral debate. We held it down at the old Hungry Lion. At the time, Paragon Cable was the cable provider. And they put that, they had that rotating thing that you'd see for coming events and what have you, and they would also put community events on channel, whatever it was. And at that time, they did that at their own expense. We didn't have to pay them. We didn't have to charge a cable fee or anything. And somewhere along the line, they got bought out and someone else got control. And what we have now is a situation where Time Warner is a 300-pound gorilla in the room, and we have no power over anything that they do. And we're asking them this simple little thing that's not going to cost them anything to give us a second channel. But they won't be a good community neighbor. They've got to go strictly by the book. They've got to go strictly by the contract. And beyond that, they've got to even go further. They've got to say, no, we want to have a 5-year. We're not going to do this for nothing. We're not going to do anything for you gratis. You know, in October, when we had this flap over going digital, they were charging elderly people $30 to come in and to configure this little box that they had to do. It was, this was something that was very simple, and it was at no fault of the ratepayer. They didn't do anything to change this. It was the industry that changed this. All these people making millions and millions and millions of dollars changed all of this system. The people watching their TV didn't do anything. All they're doing is just paying their bill every month. Most people came in and say, okay, I'll have the box and I can figure it out and I'll do it, and I'll figure it out myself. But these elderly people, they can't do this. The outrageous thing that they did is when I called them up as a Keene City Councilor, they offered to do it for me for nothing, while they're charging some 80-year-old woman $30 to do it. They're saying, oh, you're a city councilor, we'll do it for you for nothing. I got to tell you, this Time Warner Cable Company does not deserve to have a 5-year extension on this contract. They need to step up to the plate and be good community neighbors and do something for this community, because we need it. We need a second community channel. And they need to stand up and say, okay, we support that. And we'll do it for you, because it's not going to cost them anything. And that's what they need to do. And I'm not going to vote to have them, extend their contract.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Would it be in order that I make a motion, and if it's seconded, then it would give Councilor Clark the opportunity to make an amendment to that motion, and then he could talk to his amendment?
If we are ready to end discussion and take a motion and
then
perhaps amendment.
He does the amendment, then it'll open up to that discussion.
Councilor Filio?
Before we make a motion, just one comment on there. I don't think anybody's disagreeing with Councilor Clark that Time Warner Cable's the 300-pound gorilla in the room. I think you're preaching to the choir, though. We all know that. But all we're saying right here is, and we're all agreeing, they need the second channel. All we're saying here is we authorize the city manager to negotiate and execute an amendment to the best of his ability. Clearly, they're a monopoly. It is what it is. But all we're saying is, city manager, do the best you can. And in the end, that's all he can do. So we can sit here all night long and complain about the woes of a big conglomerate like Time Warner, but they're the only player, and quite honestly, there's not a heck of a lot we can do about it. All we can do is authorize the city manager to the best that he can. And that's it. So all the comments, they sound good, but it is what it is. The reality is the city manager can only do the best that he can do.
Okay, anything further from the public or councilors present? And we'll take a motion, perhaps amendment, and more discussion.
Move that the Finance Organization Personnel Committee recommend that the city manager be authorized to negotiate and execute an amendment to the Time Warner Cable franchise agreement.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Ready for discussion and perhaps...
I move that we remove the word "and execute" from the recommendation.
There is a motion to remove execute, meaning that the manager would negotiate and bring back the negotiated agreement for our further discussion. Is there a second to the motion at this time? Sorry, Councilor Clark.
Sorry, City of Keene.
So we now have a motion on the floor which empowers the city manager to negotiate and execute an agreement to the best of his ability with Time Warner Cable. Anything further, City Manager?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the negotiations are actually over, and included in the negotiations were Rebecca Landry, Assistant City Manager, as well as representatives from Cheshire TV, Lee Perkins, Tom Cook, and I know they kept their board informed of the progress that was being made. So the negotiations have taken place. The only correction I would make to any of the statements, which I certainly understand and appreciate, would be that it wasn't just a second channel. I think the negotiations took a further development relative to sharing the franchise fee, and I think it was the franchise fee discussion that actually created the desire to have an extension on the contract itself. And Cheshire TV felt very strongly, and I certainly understand why they felt strongly about the franchise fee. It's their prime revenue source, and so by getting the ceiling lifted off the franchise fee, I think that's where Time Warner wanted, as a result of that, the extension, because Time Warner also has to compete. It recognizes that any time that it increases its cost for something like a franchise fee, that it has an impact on customer base, and there are others like DirecTV, et cetera, that do compete with them. So they wanted something in return for that. I don't think it was so much the second channel. I think it was more the franchise fee that really caused them to ask for an extended period of time.
Thank you. So, anything further from the public, councilors present, committee? Hearing none, we are ready for a vote. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Next item on the agenda this evening, we have a memoranda from the airport director. This is regarding a public service of New Hampshire grant, energy efficient lighting.
Good evening, Ed Mattern, Airport Director. For a number of years now, we have been pursuing the replacement of certain lighting appliances at the airport, replacing the incandescent lights with the energy-efficient LED lights. And we're fortunate enough to be able to tap into a Public Service in New Hampshire grant program that will actually offset the cost of making those upgrades. We've done a number of different appliances, which include obstruction lights, hazard beacons, some building lights. The most recent round was some of the terminal building lights, and we have replaced some of those lights with the energy-efficient LEDs, which can reduce our electrical consumption by as much as 90%. And again, PSNH has offered a grant to assist with the cost of that. What is before you this evening is the authority to accept that grant and use those proceeds to further our LED replacement program.
Questions for the airport director? Comments from the public? Councilors present? Hearing none. Council Filio.
Move Finance Organization Personnel Committee recommends City Council authorize the acceptance of grant funds in public service, New Hampshire, in the amounts of $2,200, and let the proceeds be used towards other lighting upgrades at Johns Hopkins Airport.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. Anything from the public? Committee? All in favor? We are unanimous. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the airport director once again. A land lease agreement renewal with PJO Cooley LLC.
Yes, there are a number of lots at the airport on which private hangars are located. This particular one is up for renewal, and we're seeking the authority to renew that agreement for another 10-year period. Due to the location of this property, it is not something that is necessary for the aviation uses within the lease period. We're bringing the lease terms current in terms of the rates with the established rental rate of the other hangars in that vicinity, and seeking the authority to renew this agreement.
Anything, questions? Public? Yes, ma'am. Please come forward and... Name and address for the minute taker, please. Hello, nice to meet you.
I have a couple of comments that I would like to make on the renewal of my lease. The first one being the rate increase from .144 per square foot of land to $0.226 per square foot of land. That's a 57% increase. The current rate that I pay over the last 10 years has increased in accordance with the Consumer Price Index and has historically been considered fair. There may be a box that you can put all of the leases in and say they're all the same, but I would suspect that my lease could be unique in some ways. Particularly, I have a building that sits on leased land that is a capital investment on my part. Some of the provisions of the lease, particularly if I ever want to terminate the lease or end it, I have only a few options, one being relinquish the building to the city, at which point I incur some liabilities involved in whether or not the city wants to continue to have that building there and whether they want to remove it at my expense. The other thing I can do is sell it, which right now isn't practical. There are quite a few other owned hangars on leased land on the properties now at the Keene Airport. A lot of them, from my understanding, are vacant, and the ones that are up for sale have been on the market for a really long time, like the rest of the real estate market over the last decade. I don't see anything that would justify a 57% increase in my lease rate for that hangar. My particular property also has some significant restrictions on it, in that I'm not allowed to run any kind of extensive business. It's mainly for the storage of a recreational aircraft for non-business use. In the wintertime, snow plowing is not done by the airport, and with the current security that has been increased since 9/11, I no longer am authorized to hire somebody to snow plow the ramp, so that I lose access to the airport, and hence loss of use of my aircraft during those winter months. The only other issue I would like to address is that there is a provision in my lease that allows me to sublet if I get permission in writing from the city council. So perhaps that could be done today if all those other things are addressed.
Well, I want to ask an obvious question. There is no lease agreement that we're talking about renewing. I mean, you two parties have not agreed to.
I have a lease that has been in effect for 10 years, and I have a lease prior to that for the previous 10 years.
These terms that we're being asked to authorize the renewal of, you haven't agreed to. Am I correct?
The current lease has lapsed. It lapsed on February 6th of 2013.
So what's down here in this paragraph, this is our proposal, the city's proposal to you, but you have not agreed to it.
Right. I would like to keep the rates the same with the current CPI increases.
It's not typical that we negotiate at a committee meeting. This should have been done before this came to us. Mr. Mattern?
I would point out that, as you recall, very recently we went through a process with the FAA and the state with regard to our grant assurance compliance, and particularly as it related to our fairness in terms of assessing lease rates. And as part of that process, we were reminded by the DOT that we're obligated under our grant assurances to not be discriminatory and charge equal tenants, like tenants, the same land lease rates. A number of years ago, prior to the initiation of the current lease.
I pause you 1 second. Just getting back to my question. This is not a negotiated agreement that we are being asked to authorize the sign-off renewal of. So I don't know why this is here. And unless you tell me to the contrary, this should be put on more time until you reach some agreement or not.
I guess what I'm suggesting is that we don't really have an option in terms of the rental rate based on our compliance with the grant assurances.
You're not hearing my question.
I understand your question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, City Manager.
So there appears, and I haven't talked to Ed in a few days, but there appears to be obviously a miscommunication between the party that's leasing the property and the airport manager relative to their agreement on this particular item, which is the cost per square foot. Perhaps we should put them on more time here this evening and let us go back and see if we can't resolve this matter.
I'll make the motion to put on more time.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. Did you
Well, then, just
discussion?
point of information, did you say that this lease expired February 2013?
I think it was this past
2014.
February, just a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, right.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, we have a motion to put the matter on more time. All in favor? 5-0. Good luck.
Can I ask one more question?
No.
There is a holdover clause in the end of my last lease for if the lease should lapse, the current or currently lapsed lease and all of its provisions should be applied on a month-to-month basis, and I would like to pay my lease rather than go in arrears and be subject to penalties.
Have her contact the city manager's office. We'll work with you on that.
Okay.
Pass this off to that table. The lawyer and the manager. Okay, thank you. Where are we? One more time, Airport Director, commercial property, airport property. Can I write my number down?
Yes.
Restaurant.
Unfortunately, the two prospective tenants for the commercial properties at the airport identified in the memo have withdrawn formally. With regard to the property at 471 Old Homestead Highway, they gave no reason for their withdrawal, other than to suggest that the cost involved in the project and the process that they were required to go through, both with the City of Keene as well as with the Town of Swansea, sort of threw them off their time schedule. With regard to the terminal restaurant, the individual with all the restaurant experience unfortunately moved out of the area, and the individual who wanted to proceed with that project unfortunately didn't have any restaurant experience, and it decided that it was best, in his best interest, not to proceed without that experience, which is probably wise. Given the history of these two properties, we have tried multiple approaches to try to lease these properties, and unfortunately all have been somewhat less than successful. This has included requests for proposals, the engagement of real estate brokers, advertising in the papers, and one of the things that seems to have been consistent through the whole process has been the time related to being able to respond to an individual who was very interested. In many instances, we've heard that individuals would not even go forward once that the process was outlined. So we're looking to take a different tact at this point and have some additional latitude to be able to respond more quickly to somebody that might present themselves, an opportunity that might present themselves, to, again, be able to capitalize on the opportunity without having to lay down a long time-related process. And we're seeking the authority from this group to recommend to council that we proceed in that fashion. The Airport Advisory Commission has discussed this matter and was unanimously in support of this approach.
Committee questions? From the public, councilors? Yes, sir.
So essentially, you want to come to the finance, or you want to be able to negotiate and execute when a prospective tenant comes along.
Yes, and then report back on our process, what we've done.
But the process really doesn't take all that long. Perhaps the negotiations take some time, as it would for any landlord and tenant, would it not? I mean, essentially, if I was interested in your place, you got a notice in, you come to finance on Thursday, the following Thursday, you got authorization to negotiate, hopefully you come to some agreement, in another 10-day period, you can have an agreement, can you not?
Well, again, that seems to have been an impediment in the past, based on meeting schedules and, again, just the whole process is identified. One of the things you'll recall that we've come forward with the tenant a number of times, but again, it's been so many false starts, we haven't been able to close the deal, as it were. And I think making this a public debate, a public discussion, in some instances may not necessarily work to the individual proposers to liking. So, again, just trying to think of a different way to try to get more interest.
City Manager.
Thank you. By now, we have a pretty good idea what the City Council is interested in. We've been through this drill now a number of times, only to have each one, for one reason or another, at no fault to the city or to the airport director, not go forward. So within those parameters of what we already have established relative to this property and its commercial value and what we'd like to see there, we believed at this point in time that it would be in the city's best interest to authorize the manager to work with realtors and others in a non-exclusive manner so that any of them could come forward within the parameters of what the council's seen in the past and see if we can't ink a contract and move this along versus coming in front of the city council, spending a long time through the process and going through another and having the bad press, essentially, that comes with someone backing out, because I think there are things that we can do up front to ink a deal that would keep that from happening and make it less likely. So we think it's in the city's best interest. We wouldn't be outside the parameters that have already been established in front of this committee, and we believe that it's probably the appropriate thing to do right now in this market at this time.
Personally, I'm concerned about the transparency of the process then. The last individuals came in, we met them, they explained what was going on, got a quick approval. It was not the fault of our process that we lost them.
We'll be happy to come back then with each and every one if that's what you'd like. We're trying a little different tack. We think this would work a little better.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm going to support this, and the reason I'm going to support it is, for example, a group may decide 2-3 weeks in advance that they like the idea, then they come to the AAC, which meets after the second city council meeting at the end of the month, and sometimes we don't have another, we have the 5th month, then it comes to the city council, then the city council then passes, the mayor then passes it on to the FOP committee, and then it comes in, and then the process gets really long, and then at times over the past, we here have asked them what is going to be the square foot price, what is going to be the tax rate, what are the individual's finances and stuff, and I think in a lot of those questions that we ask, I think are priority and belong with the city manager and with the attorney and the business manager.
Bring it back.
But once they've gone through it, I would expect them to come back to the finance committee, for the finance committee to make a recommendation to the full council instead of going all backwards. I have trust in those individuals, and like the city manager said, we have set down the guidelines over and over again over the last 3 or 4 years what they expect from us.
Councilor Duffy, you had something?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, through you to City Council, I guess perhaps the city manager or the airport director. The last leasee, the Indian restaurant, how much a year were they paying in rent?
Their base rental rate was about $560 a month, plus they paid 3% of their gross. They paid all of the utilities and their portion of the property taxes.
My observation is that's a bargain compared to other commercial in the private sector as far as rent. My other observation is, and this includes the other restaurant down further where the pizza place used to be in the go-karts, those are locations that I think are challenging. I don't personally, I'm not going to say, because I shouldn't weigh in on what should be done, but I do have a discomfort when we're dealing with public property, and we do have other city-owned property where we have lease agreements, restaurants in the city. I have concern about that, and I wonder if it might even be worth just why put our energy into trying to get a food establishment down there when there's this overall master plan in effect, and there may be a better use for that space for something else other than a restaurant. That's just an observation. I'm just uncomfortable with the idea of trying to expedite this. We have had, as you said, Mr. Chair, a number of commercial or interests that, for one reason or another, and I don't think it's anything the city did, I don't think it was the process, it just didn't work out. One of the first person who wanted to have an airport theme in there, I think there are a number of restaurants that started and closed. That's just the nature of the business. So I'm going to think a lot about this before it comes up next week, depending on what the motion's made. But I do have concern, not only for this, but because we have other city-owned property where we lease to restaurants.
Thank you. Yep.
Just a clarification, the normal leases don't require AC approval, do they?
We typically try to take everything through the Airport Advisory Commission, yes. But as Chris mentioned, they meet once a month.
Yeah.
And, depending on, if, for example, the Finance Committee authorized a negotiation but no execution, now at least we're 2 cycles into that. So
Understood.
Yep. Councilor Phillips.
I'm going to agree with Chairman Greenwald. I think the process works. All these individuals that have withdrawn, it wasn't because of the process. It was just because, financially, for whatever reason, they just decided to bail. I think when we're dealing with city property, which realistically is taxpayers' property, we need to keep the transparency and the appearance of transparency to the best of our ability. And I'm not saying for a second that if we went the other way that there would be anything dishonest or not above board. But it's the appearance. It's perception is reality. And I think when we're dealing with, like I said, with properties that the taxpayers are funding, I think it all has to be completely transparent. And once again, I don't think anybody's withdrawn because of the process. They withdrawn for personal reasons.
Councilor Clark.
Well, I'm just wondering why we even own 471 Old Homestead Highway. Why don't we just sell it? It used to be private property, and I understand we took it for taxes. Why don't we just sell it? As for the terminal building, that's a different situation. But we have other excess property in town that we occasionally put on the market. I don't see any reason why we need to be in the real estate market, as far as that particular property goes. It used to be a going establishment, all the time I was growing up as a private place, so why don't we just sell it?
Thank you.
yeah, I would just point out that the property in question, we did not take it for taxes. We actually bought it as part of an obstruction clearing project. And we also got with that deal an additional 15 acres, which has significant development potential. A portion of that property has been partitioned off, and we do lease it to the go-kart Swansea Amusements, and we do generate revenue from that. And I think, the desire is obviously to generate additional revenue through the lease of this building, if not the remainder of the property.
I guess I started the questioning just to get a better idea of what, Ed was facing, and I've heard some discussion about, making the process transparent. But Ed, in our previous discussion, mentioned the Big Brother's watching us and the DOT and the lease things, and so I think we've got some oversight here. And I guess I'd probably support this because we need to try something a little bit different. What we've been doing hasn't been as successful as we want. We'd like those buildings, those pieces of real estate to be filled up with some thriving business that's going to generate some revenue and jobs. So, I think maybe we ought to try it with the proviso that, we just get a report back to the council, and, if he continues to do with his standard lease rates, it's better than what we're getting now.
Yeah. To you, to the city manager, and maybe even with this process, if you work out the whole deal, it still has to come to the city council for final approval, correct? No.
The way the motion stands right now, it would authorize the manager to execute the contract. I'm not particularly fond of that, to be honest with you, because it puts the city manager in a position of being second-guessed. But the process itself has just been so difficult that we thought maybe this was one of those instances where perhaps we ought to try something a little different. But I'm very happy to do it whatever way the council feels most comfortable. And so if you're not comfortable with the way we're suggesting here, we can certainly understand that. We can back up and do it differently.
Listen, maybe I don't know if I can word it, probably look at it, is come up with a way you go through the whole process, and I think we've done it a couple of times based on city council approval. So if you went through the whole thing and you felt that you worked out a real good deal, then you come to the city council for final approval? Is that?
That would mean deleting the word execute from the motion.
Right. So Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
the concept of a really good deal, I want to be very clear about this. We always negotiate the very best terms we can. Ultimately, and I think Councilor Filio and Councilor Powers and others are alluding to this, you're really the final arbiters of whether or not it's a really good deal. We negotiate the very best deal we can, and the council makes the decision whether or not it's a really good deal. In this particular case, with this particular property, or these two properties, they are challenged. The city did acquire one of the properties as a result of the obstruction clearing project, which was, Ed, how much was the percentage of the grant on that?
I believe we paid 5%.
5%. So the city has 5% into the cost of that property. We were required to acquire the property necessary to clear the obstructions. They were actually across the street, but the property owners, the Beluskis, had 3 actual parcels and required the city to acquire all 3, including the one that we have now. So the city has very little capital into this particular project. The FAA particularly likes to have a rental income for the airport versus selling property. They much prefer rental income. So we're doing everything right. It's just challenged. One of the things that City Attorney and I were talking about a moment ago is perhaps we can get someone's name on the line with their check up front and a tentative agreement with the city manager, subject to the final approval of the city council. It's a little different than we do it now, but that might help solidify a real proposal that someone couldn't walk away from quite so easily.
Would the city attorney want to propose some change wording for the motion, therefore?
I think that the city manager would be able to do that by removing the term execute, because you're giving the city manager the opportunity still to go and negotiate to go out and find, negotiate, put it down in writing, have the other person sign off on it, subject to approval by the city council and the good faith money up front. That would all be part of the negotiation.
Yeah, Councilor Filio.
I'm just going to move for motion. On the recommendation, delete the words "and execute."
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Comments from the public? Councilors present? Committee? Hearing none, seeing none. All in favor? Got there. Long way around the track, but
Thanks.
it's a big airport, I guess. Thank you. Okay, so now we go to item 7 on the memorandum, for those that are following at home. This is our assistant
Chair, point of order, we haven't voted on the
Well, that's-
amended motion.
Yeah, I was,
We just voted to amend the motion, but we didn't vote on the amended motion. Am I correct?
I don't think...
No, you
reality was there was no...
You moved the motion.
Time out.
Okay, fine.
Thank you.
Point of order.
Thank you.
Clarification, excuse me.
Yeah. All right, I am the chair. I got it. It's okay. Settle down.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Okay, back to the memorandum. Assistant Public Works Director. Good evening. Extension of administrative order deadline.
Hello, I'm Donna Hanscom, Assistant Public Works Director. I'm here tonight to talk to you about basically the status of the wastewater treatment plant's administrative order, where we are as far as the schedule goes and our current construction. You might remember that after we received our 2007 discharge permit for the wastewater treatment plant, it came with some pretty strict limits for phosphorus removal that we were not able to meet without an upgrade. And the way EPA deals with that sort of thing is they issue an order with deadlines in it that require compliance for various steps along the way, bringing us ultimately to compliance. And we complied with no problem with the first 3 tasks, which were included. We achieved compliance with interim phosphorus limits. We made a recommendation for what we thought we needed to do to upgrade the plant. We prepared and we submitted the final specifications to put this project out to bid. And then the last piece of this is to ultimately not just comply with the permit, but to complete the construction. And that's kind of important language here. So, after we received this order and we were planning the upgrade for the phosphorus removal, we realized that as we had other parts of this upgrade coming along, it made economic sense to combine the disinfection replacement and the blower replacement with the phosphorus upgrade. It made sense as far as doing the economy of the project. The state of New Hampshire agreed with us with that. They're lending us the money to do this project, and they said they absolutely supported that piece of it. So that's made this process take a little bit longer than it might have otherwise. But we were able to get the plans completed on time. We submitted them on time to DES. We received approval from them last April, and on the second page here you can sort of see the schedule of how we proceeded with this contract. The contractor was on site on August 17th and started setting up its trailers and doing its work. And the contractor, who is Macmillan Corporation out of Keene here, has completed quite a bit of work to date, and a lot of that includes work on the buildings that it's putting up. That's poured concrete. It's laying conduit for electric lines. It's been quite a bit of work. Of course, we ran into winter weather, which makes some of the outside work a little more problematic. And we realized that we're not going to meet this April 1st deadline to have our construction completed. Although the important thing to note, or one of the important things that I think is to note, is we are in compliance with our permit. We've kind of jury-rigged together some temporary dosing equipment, and we are in compliance and have been for a little while with the permit. But for EPA, that didn't quite make it. So they are encouraging us to ask for an extension for completing the construction. Macmillan figures they're going to finish up their construction sometime this summer. Their current schedule is sometime this summer, although under the contract they have until June of 2015. They actually have another year under the terms of the contract to finish the work. But to cover any delays, because although Macmillan thinks they'll be done this summer, to cover any delays, we're looking for an extension through the end of this year. So what we're going to be telling EPA is that we are looking for an extension through December 31st, 2014, approximately a 9-month extension.
They're not going to fine us for this.
We've been moving along with good faith. They haven't indicated that there's been any problem with it. I've been talking to them about this for some time. I just have waited a while until we actually were getting closer to knowing what the date was going to be. We didn't want to ask for extra time that we didn't need, and we didn't want to, ask for not enough time. So we've been kind of pushing it until we could come up with a realistic date.
Gotcha.
So no, they haven't indicated that they were unhappy with us.
Questions for anything from the public? Councilors present? Hearing and seeing none. Councilor Clark, I guess you're up.
I am up, okay. Move the Finance Organization and Personnel Committee accepts as information list report concerning the request for an extension of the final deadline of Administrative Order docket number 09011.
Second?
Motion's made and seconded. Anything from the public? Committee? Hearing and seeing none. All in favor? 5-0. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is a memorandum from the project manager parking, and I guess our finance director is coming forward. Parking hours of operation, parking rates, and violation rates. Names and addresses, all that. Introduce yourself, please.
I will. My name is Gary Lamro. I'm the parking project manager. And again, with me is Steve Thornton, who is the finance director for the city of Keene. Back in November, part of my responsibilities that I was hired on to do was to look at the entire parking division and to review the resources that we currently use and what in the future is going to be needed to continue to maintain a sustainable parking fund. As most of you are aware, there's been many discussions about parking. The first thing that we would like to go over is a little bit of history of why we're here. First of all, the parking division is here to try and maintain the downtown area and to provide parking for the downtown businesses, to be able to have parking for their businesses and to maintain a healthy fund. So as we walk through this process, go through this process of reviewing, we have gone to many other organizations, many other parking divisions across the state and discussed their operations and how they operate, and we all come to the same conclusion that our main function here is to make sure that we are compliant with the downtown parking ordinances, to be able to better assure the businesses in the downtown area to, again, to provide parking for them and to have convenient parking for them.
Thank you.
So with that, we have a very vibrant downtown area. We continue in the evenings to have large gatherings in the downtown. And again, during the daytime, as we move through the excuse me, I'm off here, so missed one of my points. Let's just start to say that we are here to provide the parking for the downtown businesses, to provide them parking as a partnership to be able to help them, again, to sustain a good business and to be a vibrant downtown area. Just so you're aware, the parking division is actually a special revenue fund. The parking operations actually pays for the operational portion of what we do, which is the enforcement, and it also pays for the maintenance of the current parking lots and structures, and it is supported by user fees. The parking fund is there so that we do not burden the taxpayer with extra taxes to be able to help pay for these projects and to help maintain operations. As we've reviewed throughout the years of the parking, and again, the chair currently here at the FOP committee is probably very familiar with the parking process that has gone on in the city for many years, as he was part of the parking commission. And in 2001 was the last time that the rates had been changed as far as meter rates. And when that was brought forward, it was brought forward basically to show that the revenues and the expenses were no longer meeting the requirements to sustain a healthy parking fund. So again, in 2002, there was an ordinance that was put through to be able to raise the rates for parking meters in the downtown area. And at that time, those rates were 25 cents for an hour, and it went to 25 cents for a half an hour. That was the last time it was raised. Prior to that, it was 13 years prior, which is somewhere around 1988. And as you're starting to see a pattern that we've gone a considerable amount of time between rate increases, and has now again shown that we are have an expense that's higher than what our parking revenues are bringing in. Also, part of the projects that we do here is we have parking garages, we have parking lots that have to be maintained. Over the past few years, the Public Works Division has come forward, and they've been working diligently to try and improve the maintenance programs on all of our parking lots and structures. This year here, you'll see some work being done on the City Hall, which is going to be a little bit more aggressive than what we've done in the past. They're going to be sandblasting corrosion, painting, and they'll be doing the same thing at the Wells Deck. The Wells Deck, however, we have noticed that we've had some deterioration that is occurring. We've been having some what's called spalling of the concrete under the first floor deck, and that is causing some concern at this point as to the structural, and not so much the structural integrity, but structurally what needs to be done to maintain it and to correct the problem. We will be bringing in an engineer, a structural engineer, to take a look at that, to be able to give us some advice as to how to move forward with that. So this is one of those projects that wouldn't typically have enough money to be able to pay for through a capital improvement program if our parking fund isn't being sustained at the rate that it needs to be sustained at. So with that said, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the financial status of the parking fund. Again, the last time the rates were raised for any portion of the either rates, violations, and or reserved spaces was 2002. In 2009, there was a presentation brought forward by the Keene Police Department to be able to look at rates and violations and reserve rates, which are the lease spaces that we currently have in the lots. And at that point, the reserve rates were increased, and the others were not. So with that said, I'd like to have Steve Thornton just talk a little bit about our financial status, what we are currently having today for expenses, what we currently show today for revenue, and also what our projections are if we remain the same, and what our projections may be if we look at increases.
Okay.
Thank you. And I apologize for the bumbling at the beginning.
You're doing good.
Okay, on the second page back in the handout from where Gary was, we've got a table and a graph. And before we look at these, I'd just like to comment that what we're trying to look at here are the revenues that are derived from the operations of the parking fund and our expenditures directly related to parking enforcement and the maintenance of our facilities. And that's a roundabout way of saying what I've excluded from this presentation for the sake of simplicity is any of our activity funded by the tax increment financing district. It normally is that is pretty much a wash. We raise taxes to cover debt service for certain improvements that have been done. And for a capital reserve, most years it's a wash, but it's also our budgeting is done on estimates, and so sometimes it's not quite a wash. But this is what we're looking at here: our operating revenues and expenditures. We start out with FY08, and we've got through FY13 of actuals of our operations, and then some projections based on our current rate structure and the way our expenditures have grown. And what they show is that through FY11 we had a positive net income. FY12 we operated at a little bit of a loss. FY13 a little bit bigger loss. We budgeted a little bit more in FY14, and we've gotten to a place where, having not looked at our revenues in a long time, and our town doesn't change that much. When you look at our revenues derived from our operations, there are a couple of little spikes, but it's really fairly flat. We have some spikes for some reason. We have a year here and there that's busy, but our revenues are pretty flat. Our expenditures slowly grow, and the chart indicates that what we're doing, why we can absorb losses right now, is because we generated net income and fund balance in prior years, and we're getting to a place where we're using up our fund balance, and our projections say around 2018 we'd be operating a deficit in the fund.
Steve, question. Looking at the operating and capital expenditures.
Yep.
I don't really understand why it goes up and down quite as it's going.
You know, a big part of the up and down there is the capital. And let me, because we have different types of projects. For instance, some of our capital numbers, say 2010 through 2013, $68,000 in one year, $18,200 in 11, $73,544 in 12, in 111, $568. So, what's that?
What were they?
These are, well, I'm sorry, I can't say exactly what they are. I don't remember, but we have appropriations that come through the CIP for work on our decks and our parking lots. Just going into the future, a similar thing in the current CIP is we've got $99,000 in 1 year in FY15, $80,000 in 17, and $24,000 in 19. And it depends on the type of work. Like in this case, we're doing Gilboa Avenue East and West with a mill, shim, and an overlay, pavement markings. FY17, we've got a similar project on Gilboa Lot East. We got some work on Commercial Street, that's a pavement sealing and pavement markings. And in 19, we've got the Wells Street surface lot.
So what I'm hearing and understanding and want to communicate is that these expenditures are the maintenance of the properties. If we don't do it, the parking lots fall apart.
That's right.
If we don't continue this discussion, we can't maintain the parking for the public.
That's right.
It's not like we're having some big block party out there or something.
No, this is pretty routine stuff on our existing structures. We started probably 2006 or 2007 working with Public Works to develop a bit of a program for addressing those lots.
I think it's very important that it be communicated to the public that it's the expenditures of maintaining the facilities that are driving these expenses. We don't have $757,000 worth of staff out there collecting quarters.
Right.
Because, it's a very important concept.
Yes.
The ups and downs of the revenue, I can understand. Business ebbs and flows. It's a good winter. It's a bad winter. I had conversation with Mr. Lamoureux, and we need a better title for you. That with the good enforcement of the meters, that cuts down on the perception that you can get away with it, so you tend to put your quarter in the meter, therefore fewer violations are issued, fewer revenue comes in, and it becomes a very confusing battle of issues there. Continue with your presentation. I have a page full of questions for you.
Okay.
Just wanted to clarify those two comments.
I think I've about covered it. I want to talk about this sheet with our revenues projections and the following sheet with our unallocated fund balance, and that is simply showing that, we're building that up for a while, and now it's dropping off again. So,
okay.
With that.
Okay, you've answered basically what the parking fund revenue pays for, and it's a question perhaps to you or to the city manager. Some of these capital expenditures, might they be more appropriately coming through the general fund, since it is of general purpose to the general public, as opposed to just the parking public? Because that's another way of balancing the dollars.
There's tremendous competition for the property tax dollar, whether it be the county government, the schools, or the city government. The city has historically tried to keep its use of the property tax dollar to the minimum it possibly can. By adding in the parking in any way, shape, or form, it would drive the cost to the property taxpayer versus the user. In this particular case, you have a user community downtown who work, shop, and come here for other recreational purposes. And it is a legitimate way of passing along the cost for maintaining parking and having a viable economic entity downtown. Right now we enjoy many businesses being downtown, but they do depend on parking. And their customers are willing to pay, I think, some reasonable amount of money. And the city of Keene right now has probably the lowest parking rates in the state of New Hampshire. I'd ask Gary Lamoureux to confirm that, but that's my understanding. So we're a good deal, have been for quite some time, and we're looking for some modest increases going forward.
Okay, yeah, I'm just throwing out different thoughts. There was another discussion that I had with Gary regarding what's called scofflaws. Those folks that get their tickets and go back to Connecticut or Kansas or wherever they go. Any idea how much money is lost to that, and what are we doing about it?
Well, currently, we track where, how many tickets are paid and what isn't paid. We do have uncollected fines. The difficulty is, as you state, we do have a college community here, and we do have visitors that come in from other states. Once they do receive a violation, it's very difficult to track them down. We do have a new program that we're working on right now that will be able to purchase that information to be able to pass along notices to them so that they're aware that they are owed. Again, in the city of Keene, it falls down under the registration portion of it. If you are a city of Keene citizen and you do have violations, they must be paid before you register your vehicle. So there are some things in place to be able to assist with that. We do have unpaid tickets, which is something that happens annually, and we're trying to find ways now to be able to try and recover some of those funds to help increase our revenue.
Okay. It's not appropriate to what we're doing here, but the Parking Commission did discuss booting. We used to have boots, and I know that they are towed occasionally. Vehicles are towed when they're really excessive numbers of fines. Committee, yes, sir.
I want to go back to that discussion about taxing or tax revenues for parking. We're no different than any other community across the country. Parking is an enterprise fund. It's separate and above, the taxing. So, I don't think we ought to even begin the discussion of making those kinds of changes, because it's really not a service that we make available to the general public. It's an enterprise fund, and it should operate as an enterprise fund and be able to cover its expenses. And I think we're doing what any business would do, having this discussion about how to get some more revenue. But I don't think that discussion should include taxes.
Yeah. I know we talked 2009, boy, time's going by fast. We talked about it, and I know the chief was talking about how we were working into cooperative deals with other communities, and I think you were talking about Bedford at that time, to help us to recover unpaid tickets. But it still comes down to New Hampshire, because New Hampshire has some really restrictive and privacy laws where I've got parking tickets in Washington, D.C. and Boston, and they come right to me, and I have to pay. But in most cases, we can't do that once anybody leaves the state of New Hampshire, because that's some of New Hampshire's privacy laws that prevent that.
Actually, there are some provisions that have been able to help us with that. One is that a lot of the parking enforcement departments in the state of New Hampshire use what they call the spots terminal. Spots terminal is actually through the police department. It's maintained by the state police. And what that terminal does is it has a lot of information in it that you actually have to be certified to use. Also, as part of the agreement with the state police, you are not able to utilize that information to be able to go and actually go after people with that information, to be able to make sure that they're paying. So now what we do, we have now is a memorandum of understanding with the state of New Hampshire DMV. We actually purchase the information, and now we can utilize that information to be able to, if the city council down the road wants to look at other avenues as to how to collect that money, we are able to use that information. We also have another program that we use. It's called Cardinal, which our whole ticket base is based with this company. It's the software called Cardinal. And we're able to purchase information from them from any state in the United States, so that we could utilize that information.
Councilor Duffy, I see you.
Thank you, James Duffy, City Council, Ward 4. If I may, through Mr. Chair, to Mr. Lamoureux and perhaps Mr. Thornton. I want to compliment you on the report and the presentation. It's, I think, really helpful information for us so far. And I understand the rationale of increasing the rates on the short-term meters. Certainly that encourages turnover. Also, I think raising the price of the tickets, because I work downtown and I see many people, employees, it's the price of doing business. You keep plugging your meter all day, you get a $5 ticket. I've encountered out-of-town people. Actually, there's a few gentlemen during, not the most recent snowstorm, couple back. There's been a few this year. Out-of-state had a box truck, wanted to unload into a business or some entity on Central Square, the other side of Central Square. The meter was malfunctioning because of the snowbanks. Put money in, it just kept blinking. It wasn't registering. I explained, well, I don't think if you leave a note, say it doesn't work, you try to put money on it, and he goes, well, I might get a ticket. I said, yeah, they're $5. He smiled, went in back, told his buddy who was in the back of the truck. They just laughed. Didn't even put money, it went away. They got it, it was the price of $5. It was kind of a joke. Not an incentive to, turn over or, even put money in the meters. The question I have is, what's the rationale? I mean, I understand the Gilbo lot, there's a lot of maintenance that needs to be done in our long-term lots, but what's the rationale for raising the rates in the long-term parking lots? There's a lot behind St. James Church, Gilbo Ave lot, across the street. There are a lot of employees, I understand, who use those lots. They're not always making, high wages. If my calculations are correct, if they're working during the day when you are charged to put money in those lots, 8 hours, that could add up to about $100 an extra a month to pay to park downtown. That seems to be a lot of money. So I was wondering what the rationale was, and if that factor was part of the consideration that you made before you came up with this recommendation?
Sure. Based on a lot of the things that we've spoken to other parking divisions, the psychology of parking that we see, and if we read some of the books, and I know, Councilor Duffy, that you've passed along some information regarding some of the readings that you've done. There's a psychology to the parking, and that is that in the premium spots that you have, you want to make sure that you have a rate that will be able to maintain the spaces that you have and to be able to pay for the time that you're in those spaces and get your turnover. That's what the metered rates are in the downtown are for. And the psychology of it is that you have a lower rate in the lots. And that is that if you're going to park long-term, if you're going to park 3 or 4 hours where you can't park in the downtown, you'd be able to park in those lots at a lower rate. When we looked at what everybody else is doing in the state of New Hampshire, not only in the state of New Hampshire, really the East Coast. We wanted to compare not only the state, but we went to Connecticut, we went to Massachusetts. We've talked to some in Rhode Island, just to look at what their rates are and why they do what they do. The 75 cent or the 20 minutes for 25 cents in the downtown area coincides with just about everybody on the East Coast. Some of the organizations or some of the divisions charge the same rate in the parking lots. And we felt that it should have a lower rate. Mm-hmm. And based on what we have for figures and what we need for funding to be able to maintain those lots, we felt that we needed to raise the rates also in the satellite lots to be able to make sure we had enough funding to do our projects in the future.
Yeah, there's plenty of deteriorating asphalt in, especially the Gilbo Lot Ave on behind the church. But do you have an idea of how many people this will impact? Employees, because I understand there are a fair amount of people who use those lots during the day who don't work downtown, and there are people who live in the area who park there at night and then get their cars out of there early in the morning. But is there any sense on how many people would be impacted? Are there any other possible options? Because, again, I want to get back to, that does seem to be a lot of money for someone who's possibly not making a lot of money. Is there, and I know the city is going through a process of developing a parking plan for Keene in the downtown neighborhoods for, at the request of the council last year. Is there some way to help those folks? Because I think it's not an insignificant amount of people who depend on those lots, who work downtown. And I also know, it's good that people park long-term because lots of employees, well, maybe not lots, but where I work, at least half of the 15 people in my office utilize the meters, more than 2 hours a day. They just plug it. It's easy to walk up instead of walking from where they have permanent parking behind Sid. So is that something that can be looked at? Because I think the rate, if there is an alternative and still be able to raise the rates but make it affordable as possible for those folks, it sounds like that would be the most beneficial way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. We can always look at it and see what we can come up with. But I know when we originally looked at it, that was the funding that we were requiring to try to maintain the fund.
Yeah, I understand. There is a bottom line, and we do need to do something. Yes, I agree with that part. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Council Clark.
Thank you. Through you to the parking director, I was wondering if you configured what kind of budgetary number we're talking about by raising the time period from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock. Is that substantial, or is that just something that we're looking at for turnover?
Well, basically, as we go back to the beginning of the presentation, we are downtown to be able to make sure that we have the turnover for the downtown businesses, to make sure that they have customers to be able to come to their locations. We did complete a survey of the downtown businesses to find out when they were open, when they were closing. And right now, we're in the winter business hours, so some people are closing a little bit earlier than normal. But what we did find out is that in the morning, we currently operate between 8 o'clock and 5 o'clock, 8 a.m. to 5 o'clock, Monday through Friday, or actually Monday through Saturday, excuse me. And what we are finding is that the majority of the downtown businesses have moved their opening times to a later time period because the downtown wasn't as busy. And as business owners do, they review what they're doing for revenue and expenses. So they've moved their times out. The other thing that's also happened is for those of us who have been around here for years, a lot of the stores used to stay open until 9 o'clock in the evening. The downtown, the geography of the downtown has changed a little bit, and so has the businesses. And that is that we have a lot of restaurants in the downtown area now. We have hotels. We have a lot of cultural types of activities with MoCo and Colonial Theater. And what we're finding in the evening now is that more and more often people are parking in places where they shouldn't be, which is in reserved spots of somebody who has already reserved that and pays for it. They're parking in fire lanes, and the turnover is not occurring in the downtown area. Currently, right now, anybody can park in the downtown area at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because we close at 5. They can stay there for that 2 hours, but they can stay there the rest of the evening because there's no more enforcement. And the business owners are not having the turnover in their business areas to be able to have customers be able to visit. So a lot of the divisions that we've spoken to across the state, a lot of them went to 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, and they've backed off till 7 o'clock. It better matches up to the time periods that their businesses are open in the downtown area to provide parking for them. So as much as right now we operate between 8 and 5, as you'll see in our recommendations, we're looking to go 9 to 7, 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. That would allow the morning commute to have the opportunity to stop at one of the coffee shops or their restaurants or wherever business is open when it's a light traffic area or light time of traffic. They'd be able to park there free. However, in the evening, when we actually need the compliance of making sure that all of the lanes are remaining open, making sure that they're parking in the proper locations, and making sure that there's some turnover for the businesses, that's why we're going to be recommended to go to 7 o'clock in the evening. So basically, we're going to be we'll be losing 1 hour at the beginning and gaining 2 at the end. So in reality, we have 1 more hour of operations. It just better suits and better coincides with the time period of the business owners of the downtown.
Okay.
One more question about, okay, this, as you mentioned before, this has nothing to do with the TIF, where that money is for investment in new infrastructure and such like that. So the extra revenue here is just for maintenance of current buildings and things like that, and won't, I was just kind of wondering if you'd thought about, if you projected out when we do increase, the parking and put in one or two other surface lots and maybe a parking garage or two, is that going to better position us to be able to afford the payback period of building something, like maybe a parking garage? Because I assume that these same rates will apply.
You want to try that? You want me to?
Well, I think that, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely.
So the question, if I heard it correctly, Councilor, Mr. Chairman, is that will this revenue increase better position the city relative to new facilities, new parking facilities? Is that correct, Councilor?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that is the motivation.
No, I didn't mean that. I would just, I
don't know that it would.
I didn't mean that. I was just saying that if we had these new regulations in place and that we were to bond something to build a parking garage, it obviously would have to have revenue to pay it back.
Right.
These new rates would help us be able to afford, in other words, another place.
Well, these new rates, if they're applied to new facilities, for example, if new parking structures are constructed and the rates applied to those facilities, yes, they will help to buy down debt. Existing parking right now, meters that the rates would be applied to will probably offset the cost of doing business, which would be the maintenance and other costs. But if we were to construct new parking decks, that would be a combination of tax increment financing as well as some additional meter revenue, which would be obviously enhanced by any increase. So yes, on that basis, yes.
Councilor Filio, you had something
Just a couple of general comments, and I applaud our parking director for all the work that he's been putting into this. I know it's been time-consuming. On one of the issues as far as altering the hours, that completely makes sense. I completely would agree with that. But just a general comment, I really want to tread cautiously here. I realize there's been a lot of comments made that Keene's parking is a bargain, and it probably is. Sometimes taxpayers need a bargain. Sometimes they're hard to come by. But with that said, one of the issues that we're going to be facing shortly, and one of the things that businesses downtown are going to be facing shortly, is going to be direct competition from the Colony Mill in the center of Keene, both walking distance from downtown and both with quite a bit of free parking. Obviously that the developer that has purchased these properties is obviously going to be going ahead, great guns, and putting a lot of money into these properties. He didn't buy these properties to lose money. He's going to be obviously competing. Obviously, these stores downtown are going to be competing with existing businesses downtown Keene. I don't think there's any secret that they've already tried to recruit businesses from downtown to go into the center of Keene and the Colony Mill. And once again, we're going to be competing with free parking. So, as far as increased rates and increased penalties, like I said, I'm not completely on board with that. I am going to tread cautiously on this. I'm not saying I'm completely against all of it. We do need revenue, so at least it's balanced. So we're taking in what we're expending. It might be maybe that we're expending too much, and we need to look at that particular issue. But once again, before we go ahead, I really want to tread cautiously, because this is one of those little things that really affect people and can really irritate people that shop downtown. And I really want to be careful that we don't push them to competing businesses.
Councilor Roberts.
As Councilor Powell has said about being an enterprise fund, and if we just go look at the chart that you put up here, if we do nothing, if we keep everything the same as it is right now, over the next 7 years, we lose we go $1.4 million in the hole. And I don't know the technicality, but if this goes $1.4 million in the hole, where does the money come to make it up? Are we legally required to increase the rates, or are we going to have to use the taxpayers to fund the deficit?
Rhetorical, or?
I don't know the answer to that one.
City manager has a...
Well, it could easily become what they refer to as a doom loop, because what happens is we wouldn't have the money to put into the maintenance and the upkeep of the downtown and the parking structures to the extent necessary, which could work to the detriment of the downtown businesses even more so than free parking at the Colony Mill. So it is a delicate balance. I hope, based on the conversations we've had with the new owners of the center of Keene and the Colony Mill, that they're not trying to raid the downtown, and that they recognize that there's a symbiotic relationship between the two entities, and that there'll be a connection through Gilboa Avenue that might actually even create a downtown avenue to those locations. So getting to your point, if you don't spend the money on the infrastructure now, it's got to come from someplace or it deteriorates. If it goes on the property tax rate, it means there's less money to spend for other things because there's only so much money that can come from the property taxes. The state is heavily dependent on property taxes. People don't like to pay them. They're very upset, and we know that, and we try to keep them at the minimum. That's why we have user fees.
Okay, just for clarification, we're discussing this. This is an informational report, and at most, all that we're going to accomplish this evening would be to direct staff to prepare an ordinance, and then we'll have the real discussion about tweaking it for how much and for what. This is an open discussion for the public, so if you would like to join in, please introduce yourself once again.
Joe Merzoff. Looking at your figures here, I wonder if you know that from 2008 to 2013, cost of living's gone up 6%. Okay, I looked at the numbers this morning. Your expenses here have gone up 26%, from 767 to 967 over that same time period. 6% versus 26%, right? Our superintendent of schools recently told us we have a decreasing tax base. We're also losing children in the schools over time, so I assume the population is going down. So here you have expenses going up at 26%, right, and your cost of living 6% and a decreasing population. Right? This doesn't make sense. It's the expenses that are the problem. And what Mr. Thornton said about, the fluctuation, those were small numbers, 70,000, 20,000. This is a $200,000 difference.
Right.
Okay? So the problem here isn't, as Mr. Filiol was pointing out, is in the expenses. It's not in the revenues. And as Mr. Duffy pointed out, this is a tax. This is a tax on workers. It's a tax on people who go to the stores, right? It's a reason they don't go to the stores, right? It's so I think it's a very bad idea to up the tickets and to up the you also might think of this. You might have seen your finance people. You might have seen like Ben Bernanke. He talks about trying to keep inflation up these days, right? No longer inflation's a problem to try to keep things. Try to keep it up, right? There are deflationary forces here, and government doesn't seem to get it, that they shouldn't be charging more and more each year. We have a school board, 6% over 5 years. They want to raise, if they got everything they wanted, they were going to get 6% this year, right? There's a problem in Keene. The taxes are too high. The school taxes are high. They admit it's high, right? The taxes are too high here, too. And this is a tax. This is more money you're trying to squeeze out of the public, right? You shouldn't be doing this. This is the wrong thing to do. Right.
Just for clarification, I had asked the question early on about that capital expenditure line, and the answer was it's keyed into repair projects.
Right, but the projects he talked about were small numbers. They didn't even make close to that 200,000. They were 20,000 one year, going out to 2007. They were 70,000 another year, and they went up and down. But here you have a steady increase over 5 years from 767 to 967. That's 26%, with decreasing population and only 6% inflation. So it's crazy. This is just government being greedy for revenues. And this is something we can't do if we want to sustain the community, whether it's the school or whether it's the city. We got to take less. All right. There's a problem. You're either hiring too many people, or you're paying them too much. You're giving them too big raises because the public at large is not getting those raises. Okay. And you have to help the community. You just can't. You got to hold the government's appetites down.
Thank you. Other public comments, questions? Committee? Yes, sir.
Sure, I have a question for the director, the chairman of the Parking Commission. I noticed that there was also an idea attached.
Excuse me, could you identify yourself?
Garrett Ian, Leverett Street. I noticed that there was also a proposal attached to this parking rate increase, and I would speak against any increases, especially the drastic increase of the long-term lots as opposed to the short-term lots. But one of the things I found most concerning was a proposal that only quarters would be able to be used in the meters. Now, I wonder why only one particular type of coin would be selected, especially considering that if you look at the rate increases, they're all divisible by nickels. If it was 25 cents get you 30 minutes, a nickel would get you 6 minutes. If 25 cents got you 20 minutes, a nickel would get you 4 minutes. So I don't see why there would be an intentional push to make it difficult for the people to be able to purchase time by only having one type of coin that they can use. It seems to me to be a deliberate attempt to make it more difficult for people to pay their meters, and so that they're less likely to pay, so they're more likely to get tickets. It requires you to carry quarters. I can't think of any business that tells you you have to pay in a particular type of denomination. That seems ridiculous. Even soda machines have change slots on them, so you could pay in $1 if it's only 75 cents. So I would strongly urge and say that the people are definitely against the idea that you would have to pay in quarters. Robin Hood of Keene and the Merry People would still be able to take care of everyone and pay with quarters, and we'd see about distributing more quarters to more people. But I don't see why this wouldn't affect Robin Hood, but it definitely would affect the people. So I would stand against this move to make it so you have to spend a quarter in order to buy time on a meter.
Thank you. Thank you.
If I might clear that up.
If you like.
The intent of changing over is that we were going to do a minimum of 25 cents. It does not mean that we can't put nickels and dimes in. It just means that it would be a 25-cent minimum charge.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, comments from public or?
Oh, about that minimum charge. So if you had a dime, you could...
Yes, I recognize you again.
Okay. So if you put a dime in, I guess that would mean that you'd have to put 3 dimes in before any time would register?
Correct. That's a recommendation that you could put 2 dimes and a nickel in and get your 25 cents, and that's when it would register. That's correct.
Interesting.
Thanks. Yes.
Good evening, James Cleveland, 173 Washington Street. I'd like to start off talking, I agree with Mr. Duffy. I think the most egregious thing about this whole proposal is the increase on the off-street parking. Just for comparison, the uncovered and the covered lots, they'll go up about 12% if you average the two. And if you broke that out over 13 years, that'd be a 1% increase a year. So even if you had increased it yearly. Now, for comparison, the on-street parking will go up 50%. So if you broke that out over 13 years, that'd be 4% a year. Now, the real problem, as I see it, is the off-street parking. So basically, the rate will go up 200%. And if you broke that out over 13 years, that'd be a 15% increase per year. And I agree with Mr. Duffy that a lot of employees will be harmed by this increase. You know, there's people that work downtown, and those are the people who use that parking. Another thing I'd like to address, the 25-cent minimum requirement. So I think it's going to lead to frustration if you require 25 cents. So suppose someone wants to eat at Lindy's Diner and they only have 2 dimes. They may get frustrated. They may think the meter's broken. They may put a nickel in and, oh, the meter's not working, so I'm not going to pay for it. Or I need to go get change from a business, so now I need to take the risk that I could get ticketed. So I think that that's a terrible idea, and it's going to lead to frustration from people. I don't see why, even if you do want to increase it, why would you want a minimum? Someone may want to park in Gilbo, run down to Corner News, and grab a snack. They don't want to buy 25 cents worth of parking. So I feel like you're limiting choice in that scenario, and you're also limiting the ability, it's harder for people to pay and be in compliance with the ordinance. One thing I was curious about, the on-street rates, maybe that's more reasonable, as I mentioned, but to Mr. Randy's point, and I'm sorry I can't pronounce your last name, but I think it would have an impact on the downtown businesses. I thought that was a great point that he made, that the center of Keene, is up and coming. There's a plan. There's an investor who wants to turn that property around, and it is going to compete with the downtown. And I guess to Mr. Murzoff's point, I agree with him. There's not a problem with the revenue. It's a problem with cost. He mentioned there's a 26% increase over 6 years. Well, in the projected numbers, there's a 16% increase. So that's a big number each year. It just keeps going up. One thing I was curious about, maybe you guys can comment, how did you guys figure the new revenue numbers? How did you arrive at that figure at the bottom?
Mr. Thornton.
Like you're talking about meter revenue?
Correct. And the other one.
And the other one? Okay. Well, the meter revenue is we have a certain number of meters of on-street spaces and a certain number of off-street spaces. And it's about 2/3 to 1/3.
Okay.
And so we looked at our meter revenue, said, this is the allocation. This is the allocation between the two. Here are the costs to the costs that the parking people had suggested. Well, we've got a few different scenarios, and just ran those numbers and projected the increase based on an average, sort of a weighted average of the last 4 years of what those revenues have been.
Now, one thing I would caution, I think, and maybe it's debatable whether this would happen, if you don't factor in maybe even a slight decrease in demand from the increased rates.
We did that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess some other questions I had. What is the major driver of this increase in cost? What makes it keep going up year after year after year?
Okay.
I would try.
Yeah, okay, well, okay, so we've got operating and capital rolled into one here, which at the time we were trying for simplicity, but maybe that wasn't a good idea. In looking at our operating costs, which are parking enforcement and maintenance, our expenditures were $716,000 in 2008 and $805,000 in 2013. So there has been an increase in operating costs, but it's not that.
Could you read those numbers to me again?
715 in 2008.
And that's the operational costs?
Operational costs. And 805 in 2013. And then there are ups and downs in the years in between. So it's gone up. What we do have is we've got increased capital costs. We in 2008 we put aside $5,000 a year for each of our parking decks. We now put aside $25,000 for each of our parking decks for larger repairs.
Okay.
And that may or may not be enough in the long run. The repairs to those facilities are expensive. We've also started some ad hoc repairs to the parking decks and also increases in the lot. So in the years we're looking at are, what we had for our maintenance expenses were $51,006 in 2008, and then, they changed, $30,000 in 2009, $98,000 in 2010, and then we've got $162 in 2013. So, a lot of our growth, the big bump up in that numbers is trying to get a handle on the maintenance and preserving our infrastructure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so what percent is operations versus maintenance?
Well, I'm not very good at throwing those numbers right out. Let's say this, 161 in 2013 for the big maintenance, and 805 for our operations, which is, routine maintenance like snow plowing, and if you've got the calculator, maybe you can.
So it's like 20%.
Instead of
in that year it was 20%. In any given year, it's not 20%.
Instead of trying to do this on the fly like this, this is the only one who could do that, the number man. I think it would be appropriate as we move forward if you could break that out.
Sure.
Because I think that was my question early. It was the gentleman over there. Now it's your question about this.
15% on operations.
Okay.
So it's still way more than 60%.
Okay, thank you, City Manager.
These costs do not track CPI, and that's unfortunately a misnomer that many people have. They track the cost of energy and the equipment replacement and equipment rates, as well as costs that get passed along relative to personnel, et cetera, by outside influences, for example, the State of New Hampshire Retirement Fund. So these costs can go up in manners that do not have any similarity to the CPI at all. I know that the average property taxpayer doesn't understand that. I don't know why they would. They look at their own expenses, they go to the grocery store, et cetera, they go to the gas pump, and they see various costs that are being passed along to them. The City of Keene has other expenses, energy being primary, and employees being another, as well as the fact that these are aging infrastructure. As you can look at these parking decks, they're no longer brand new. The one behind City Hall has had to have the deck replaced every couple of years now relative to its overall continued operation. So, and unfortunately, it doesn't track CPI. It won't track CPI. It doesn't mean it's a waste of money. It's a decision that has to be made relative to keeping these facilities. And I think you're on the right track. We should come back, show you where the expenses have been going. I think that they'll answer most of these questions, and they'll be very helpful, I think, to getting at the reason why these costs go up. And remember, we've had good luck 2 times in a row. We've had 12 and 13 years between rate increases. There is some cost averaging there that also takes place on the front end to get the additional benefit on the back end of that period of time.
As I said before, this is like the intro for the main event, which will be when we're actually discussing the ordinance that will change the rates, and as we add here, subtract there, or we don't add any there, but I think that we need this information to settle our heads and to explain it better to the public.
Mr. Chairman, I would also say that the city's overall budget has been going up by 2%.
Okay. Did you have more questions?
Yeah, I just want to touch on a few more things. So one thing I was curious about, so if you expand the operational hours, what impact will that have on your operational costs? Are you going to need another person?
Well, currently, we have one full-time person, and we had 2 part-time personnel that we, back a year and a half or so ago, we eliminated 1 full-time position, and we went to 2 part-time positions to get the amount of hours of coverage we need. Currently, we have 1 full-time, 1 part-time enforcement officer, and we are looking to put that 3rd person back on. Is not because of increase in violations, it's more of being able to cover the amount of hours that we need for the downtown for compliance.
And I guess my final question here, so my understanding is there's a surplus in the parking fund right now. Is that correct?
Right, there's a fund balance, yeah.
Okay, so in the parking fund is supposed to be revenue neutral, right? Is that correct?
No. No, that's not a true statement. We're
So
supposed to
in-
present a balanced budget, but each year, I mean, the real world works that each year, sometimes you're going to spend more, sometimes your income is going to be up, sometimes your expenses will be up, sometimes they'll be down. You never go in with a balanced budget and spend 100%, not a cent more, not a cent less, recognize revenue of not a cent more, not a cent less. So what you said, that is not an accurate statement.
But how much is the surplus again?
At the end of FY13, our fund balance was $706,000.
And suppose that nothing was done, so revenues, nothing was changed, how long would that surplus fund the parking fund?
We would be out of money sometime in
Fiscal year
FY18.
17.
All things being equal. All things being equal.
Okay, so this is really not an emergency then? Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your questions, and I think other answers will be forthcoming. I'll go to the committee first.
Well, Chris has been.
To go along with the city manager stated, and if we remember around 2007, oil was $70 a barrel. Then about a year or two later, it was $150 a barrel. Those all have important costs. Gas is being cost more to drive around the city. Doing asphalt repairs costs more. So there's so many things that it goes up and down. You had the problem in the Crimea. Oil went up $4 a barrel, then it went up gas went up 10 cents in one day. All those have an effect, so there's no way that you can sit down there and budget out all those changes, unexpected changes that come. The parking committee, the parking department has to adjust to those, and sometimes they make surpluses, sometimes they have deficits. And to go with the question, like I said earlier, looking at the numbers, we would lose, with no change, we'd lose 1.7, we'd go into debt by $1.7 million by fiscal year 20. By fiscal year 17, the whole debt that the whole surplus that we have now would disappear, and then we would not be in a position as a city, as the city manager goes, the circle of doom or the cycle of doom. We would then be in the cycle of doom because we would not have any resources whatsoever to repair any of the stuff that we have.
Councilor Clark, I'm going to regret saying that.
That's the first time I've heard that. It's a good one.
It's actually called a doom loop. And
a doom loop,
Yeah,
okay.
and it's actually what happens to an aircraft when it starts to go into a fall.
I went to the Keene College City meeting where they were talking about their differences and such like that. And one of the best things that came out of that was the idea that we shouldn't be promoting parking. We should be promoting less parking. We should be promoting, people not driving and such like that. Well, I may be naive in, considering our control over multinational corporations and things like that, but as far as paying the bills every day, I'm not naive. And what intrigues me about this whole thing is the question that I asked the city manager is this is going to put us on some. If we think about this and go forward with letting them put an ordinance together that we can look at later, it's going to put us on some financial footing so that in the future, we can have some real ability to look at the solutions that we're going to have to look at in the next 3 years, believing that people aren't going to lessen their need for parking and things like that. It's going to increase, and we're going to need to deal with that in 2 or 3 years. So if we have an ordinance in place that's going to allow us to afford to pay back bonds that are going to allow us to put in place some of the things that we really need. I think that we ought to let the staff go ahead and put together some numbers and a plan that they can bring back to us later, that we can look at and put in place.
Thank you. Public comments? Counselor comments? Come on down.
Hi, Jason Denonville of 12 Rule Street. I'm curious about this extended enforcement hours to 7 p.m. Did any businesses actually approach the city requesting those hours?
They haven't approached the city. I have talked to some of the business owners in the downtown area and explained to them what our process is. And again, this was just to get an idea of from the city council on direction, and there'll be a lot more discussion when it comes out to the ordinance. What we have found is, again, the reason why we do what we do is to coincide with the hours of operations of the downtown businesses. That's the partnership that we have with the city of Keene with our businesses to make sure that they have the ability to have customers reach their store. So we will continue to discuss with them. We do communicate with a lot of the downtown business owners by Ginger Hill, our parking operations manager. She keeps them informed of what we're doing and the things that we're doing.
Sure. Thank you. More public? Counselors? Staff is still awake? Well, committee, what's your pleasure to proceed? Choices are, we can recommend, as the recommendation saying here, directing staff to prepare an ordinance, have more conversation.
Just one comment. Yeah, I will, despite my trepidation and tread cautiously, I will vote to move forward. At this point, it's only informational. We're directing city staff for the ordinance so we can actually read exactly what's being presented. When it is presented, like I said, I do have a lot of yellow and red flags that are flying in front of me, but I think we owe it to staff to at least proceed and put something solid in front of us to actually make a vote on.
Okay. Any other comments prior to motion making? Who's up?
Me. Move that the Finance Organization and Personnel Committee recommend that the report be accepted as informational and to direct staff to prepare an ordinance for first reading.
Second. We have a motion and a second. I would say, as a comment, some very good comments came forth, and there's some questions that I think staff will have really good answers as this ordinance comes forward.
Thank you.
And there will be a lot more discussion.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. We did keep track of some of the questions that were going on, and again, we'll track through the meeting minutes.
Okay,
so
thank you.
We get it all.
Any last chance? Questions, comments? Committee? All in favor? All in favor? 5-0. Thank you.
It's already adjourned.
Thank you all. No, it's not adjourned. It's okay. Now, you think it's over, but please turn the page. The final event of the evening, we have our capital improvements program. This is part of the budgeting process. It's the planning document that lays out essentially a 5-year plan. It's been introduced, it's been discussed, there's been a public hearing, it's been in and out of council, and now we are at the point of the Finance Organization and Personnel Committee will make a recommendation. Don't leave. This is the more exciting part of the show. We'll make a recommendation to the council. As I said earlier, since there has been a public hearing already, the public comments cannot be made. However, the committee can discuss. We can amend the document in front of us, and this is what goes forward to the council for adoption next Thursday. That having been said, City Manager, do you have any words of wisdom to add?
I'd just like to thank the City Council and all those who have participated from the audience as well over the course of the workshops. I believe that you did a very thorough airing of this particular budget, and I think that also helps the people at home who watch the show. And I call it the show.
Show.
Well, it is tonight, apparently, in my mind. Watch the council, the subcommittee meeting, and hopefully feel that they've learned something about the process and the budget itself. If you have not heard from disgruntled or or anyone else who might be feeling that needs to be done something differently, then I would think that we've done a good job, and we'll let full city council make that determination next week.
Anything from questions from councilors present prior to motion? Seeing none, the chair would move that the capital improvements program 2014-2015 through 2019-2020 be accepted and recommend to council adoption at the next meeting.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Are there any amendments that would be the time to otherwise change? Councilor Filio.
Just one, Mr. Chairman. At the public hearing, we did hear I thought, an impressive comment from former city councilor Redfern. And it's on page 50. There's actually a proposal of a $20,000 study, and I think Mr. Redfern made some pretty good comments on that. And that's exactly what it is. It's a $20,000 study for basically a bad idea. It's basically the feasibility of a path or a trail, if you will, somewhere behind the middle school, out through the swamps, and through some rather treacherous grounds. And it's one of these studies that, once again, it's a $20,000 study. The money's gone. Once you do the study and it's gone. And quite honestly, I don't need to spend $20,000 of taxpayers' money to what says common sense is a bad idea. I mean, when that money's gone, it's gone. A better appropriation for that $20,000, as former Councilor Redfern mentioned, would be for the Cheshire Trail North Phase 2, which, as we know, gets some matching funding, and it's a viable trail, and it's already under construction. And so, with that said, and as we made a couple of comments, how would we do this? Basically, it would stay within the capital improvements recommendation, but I believe we should retitle that, rather than a study, that it would go to the Cheshire Trail North Phase 2.
Second.
Question to the finance director and city manager: is that an appropriate vehicle to keep the plan intact and still accomplish the goal?
I don't see any problem with that. We do not see any difficulty with what you're proposing here this evening.
Okay, just the methodology, so it...
That's what I mean. I'm only speaking to the methodology.
Okay, good. Okay, so we have a proposal before us. Any comments? Yes, sir.
I support the proposal because right now, while we got the archaeology and other stuff going on behind the middle school, we have no idea what that's going to result in the future. And so I think it would not be a good idea to study something that we have no control over.
Councilor, anybody? Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So the reason it was in the budget is because over the past years, people have felt very strongly about this particular issue. I certainly understand what was said here, and I did not hear former Councilor Redfern speak at the public hearing, but I have heard him talk on this before. I would only say to you that if this is a good idea, and for some it is, it will come back. And right now we do have phase 2 of the Cheshire Trail, which would be helped by any additional monies. And hopefully, as this matter progresses, Jonathan Daniels Trail could come back at a later date and be reconsidered then. And that's not trying to suggest either way on it, other than just to say you'll see this. Most likely, you'll see this project again.
Procedurally, I recognize Councilor Duffy. It's for. Can I even?
Sorry.
Can he speak now or next Thursday? Procedurally.
Well, I'd defer to the city attorney.
Oh, there he is.
The city attorney looks like the Cheshire Cat back there.
The rule is, once the motion is made, the motion, I mean, this is not an opportunity for public comment, but Councilor Duffy will have an opportunity on Thursday night.
Okay, thank you. I didn't see you back there.
So I understand Councilor Filio's, we're going to be, he's asking that we take this $20,000 from this CIP item and transfer it into...
Cheshire Rail Trail North Phase 2, that is correct.
Which is under which...
We're retitling it. It'll remain there. It'll be retitled.
Okay.
It's not a transfer, it's just a name change.
Okay.
Okay, so are we ready to vote? All in favor? 5-0. Any other amendments to be offered?
Not an amendment.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
To the question, I'm not sure to who, but last year's CIP had a page dedicated to a security gate at the sewer treatment plant, which does not appear in this year's budget. And I was wondering, this year's CIP anywhere, and I was wondering if has that been refigured, that money, or has that been deleted, or has it been reconfigured so that we can get the project done in another area?
That project is dropped?
No.
Or is it in there?
It's my understanding the project was not put forth this year by the department, so it's not moving forward.
Thank you.
Okay. Did you have anything that you'd like to?
Yeah. Once again, we're talking about raising money through taxation from taxpayers. And we're looking at a CIP budget that's more than last year, but we're putting less money against infrastructure, which concerns me. But having said that, I fully understand that there's only so many dollars that are available. We heard some comments the other night at the public hearing, very few, but some comments on some good projects and good comments that have caused us to make at least one action tonight. The other comments we heard were about the skate park, and we had a lot of support there. But at the same time, we've got a lot of folks, particularly elderly, that are saying, I can't afford to be paying any more taxes. So it's a delicate balance. And I support this whole program, but I just want to say again, and I think I've said it for the last 2 years, that somehow we need to come up with a new process or some way to expand our tax base, attract more people, attract better businesses, better paying jobs, so that we can all afford to pay the taxes and we can do the kind of things that we want to do, and across the board. The youngsters that are still in school, those that want recreation programs, and those of us that are getting ready for the rest home. So, we really ought to be looking at a $5 or $6 million project here tonight, and we're not. We're being prudent. We're doing what everybody's asked us to do, but we're really not helping the situation, because sooner or later we got to fix these roads. And I don't know how this guy's going to do it this year, because we got a mess out there. So we need to think about those things. We can't just pass this tonight onto the council. There's a couple other steps that we got to get on that bandwagon and figure out how to pay for more of this, double this in the very near future, because it needs to be done.
Thank you. Any other comments or amendments? Yes, sir.
I'll do real quick. I agree with Tom wholeheartedly, because when I got out of the Marine Corps and came back to Keene, then all of a sudden we got whacked really big, because I found out that the city of Keene hadn't been doing its water and sewer for a long time, and I was trying to figure out why.